mystical, brave, like put it all out there type humans that just that's totally, it's magnetic to me. I just want to be around the change makers, the curse breakers, you know what I mean?
Oh,
that's what I want to be around. That's what I want to be like.
Yes. Hello and welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast. My name is Kristyn. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's episode is a friendly conversation with my friend Burju about romantasy, the romance fantasy genre. Specifically, we are talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses, as well as A Court of Mist and Fury, which are the first two books in what is kind of shorthanded as ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I was debating whether this is something that belongs in a season based on Severance, which is season 1 aired in 2022 on Apple, and season 2 is coming out in January. And I remember that when I first released and announced in season 2 that I would be doing Severance, that I was working with a download that I got, which was Process, Promises, Pleasure, Purpose, and Polyamory. And I remember that when Severance came to me, I was knee deep in season 1 and working on Little Women, and that I can't do a deep dive into one story without being held and supported by some other story that is nourishing me in some way. And so I can't be nourished by Severance when I'm diving deep into it. I need something else to kind of be holding on to me. I can't explain it any way other than that. And I found a handful of people that were talking about this ACOTAR series. It felt just kind of like it was just twinkling at me from the universe. And so I started reading it. And initially, I was reading it because I had close friends to me. Burju is one of them that had recommended it to me. And I want to also remind myself, and perhaps you listeners, or maybe tell you for the first time, that one of the goals, maybe my biggest purpose in this podcast, is to really see that stories can be a way that our wildness or our intuitive knowing can speak to us. That sometimes stories can just plant themselves so deep into us. And I don't know that, in my experience anyway, that there's been outside of maybe like my high school English class or something like that, like there just hasn't been for me a great place for me to process that. There hasn't been a really solid, securely attached community of friends or elders that I can kind of hash it out and figure it out. And so my podcast is here as prompts, as practice, as modeling, like what can happen when we choose to connect with a loved one, with a friend, over stories. And the reason I am doing Severance in the first place is because my best friend Jamie, that we heard from in episode 1 of this season, she loved it and recommended it to me. And so I can engage in a story as a way of connecting to someone else. And then when that story also kind of sinks its claws into me or plants its seeds deep in me, and that I feel captivated by it, then it's like a deeper connection, because I can say, wow, you were moved by this and I was moved by this. And let's really sit in why that might be, how that might be, how can this inform our pathway to liberation. So I will be making some connections here at the very beginning, relating romantasy and ACOTAR to Severance. But if you are here for Severance and are only interested in Severance, today's episode is going to be very short for you. And if you are here for ACOTAR, you can look at the timestamps and just fast forward. It doesn't matter to me. But all that to say, spoiler alert, I guess, that if you have not yet watched season 1 of Severance and you also have not read the ACOTAR series, especially books 1 and 2, but let's just be safe. And if you're sensitive to spoilers and you haven't read, I think it's 5 books. I've read all 5, and Burju and I might have just little references. So just don't be mad at me if you've read the first 2 books, and we might say something that sort of spoils book 4 or 5 or something. I don't know. So yeah, feel free to pause and come back later. And also, if you've not watched either of those things and you're not sensitive to spoilers, but you also don't really want to watch or read, and I don't know, you want to listen along, that's fantastic. Welcome. And I will do my best. I do my best to kind of try to provide a little bit of context so that you can get the gist. But that it is my hope that there will be something here for you, even if you do not have the time, capacity, or interest in engaging with those stories, that I'm hoping that I can make it accessible to you in some way. And I guess I just want to take another moment here to just say that a favorite author of mine, Sophie Strand, I know I mentioned her in my previous season, and I will be mentioning her works several times in today's episode, and I'm excited to be having her on the podcast in early 2025, so stay tuned for that. But I attended a workshop of hers called Myths as Maps a couple weekends ago. And there were a couple of, just a few little tidbits. My brain was blown pretty much the entire time, as it always is whenever I'm in shared space with Sophie Strand. But the one thing that really stuck with me is how she just talks about that when we get together, we're pollinating, we're cross-pollinating these ideas. Carmen mentioned in a previous episode this idea of penguin pebbling. And I think it's the same. And I think it maybe is sort of informed by when I think of polyamory, I think of that there's just that there's a larger ecology, and that, there is no one pollinator for one flower. It's that a flower can be pollinated by multiple different pollinators, and pollinators can pollinate multiple different plants and flowers within that plant. And I really do think the same is true of stories, and that I don't want to ignore the fact that in my Severance season, I'm supported by ACOTAR. And if I had given myself permission to go outside of a linear way of thinking, there would have been a Severance episode in my Little Women season, because the fact is Severance was resourcing me for the slog that was recording and editing my previous season. And so there's something playful with this that I'm offering. And yet, when I think about Severance as sci-fi and ACOTAR as fantasy, I realize that, of course, sci-fi and fantasy share a lot of commonalities. They have this new world that they've constructed that I believe gives us just enough difference. Kind of just like having a period piece like Little Women, it gives us this different perspective with which we can view our own world, our own lives. And what comes to me too, and this is a quote that a friend of mine shared with me from Frances Weller, that says, "Many of the great myths begin in a time such as this. The land has become barren, the king corrupted, the ways of peace lost. It is in these conditions that a ripeness arises for radical change." And I don't think anybody has to be a master tracker of collapse to be able to look around and see that we are living in a time that is ripe for change, a time that stories like sci-fi and romantasies can really inform us of who are we, what matters to us, what does liberation look like, how can we collectivize. And that is the power of this pollination episode to me. For those of you following along with the Severance and are but really, Kristyn, where's the connection to Severance here? what I really want to make sure I spend some time on before season 2 comes out is the power of the liberatory work that is Rickon's book, The You Are. So for those of you who have not seen Severance, there is this severed floor of Lumen where these people have like no connection with the outside world, and the color scheme is very like drab blue, blues and green. But then the workers on the severed floor come across this book that is called The You Are, and it is this bright orangish reddish. It is like the most like radical, out there, sprang up out of nowhere, Dionysian, if you will, which will make sense as you listen to this episode, spore sprouted, and there is now this little teensy tiny bit of liberation. There is this liberatory work that it was created by a very flawed individual. And for those of us who have seen Severance, and like it is very easy to judge both the writing in that book, the person who did it. He has he's a very insecure person, and yet that was enough. It was enough to get in there and help disempowered people to awaken and connect to their own agency. That there is power in things that we would feel judgment towards. To the rules in Lumen, this book was taboo. And so the question that I'm sitting with is the power of engaging in things that imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy would tell us as taboo can actually be a ticket to our own liberation. And that like good enough things can come in flawed packages. So I think that's the biggest connection that I can really make, is that ACOTAR as a series also has a person in particular that kind of is this liberatory invitation to reconnecting to a creative practice, and I will go into that more in this episode. But that is really the crux of this, is that there is a story, there is a book, there is a person, there is a creative practice that can be inviting us into reframing our life, our world, an invitation for us to collectively imagine a more liberated future. Okay, so I will just direct you to the timestamps. Today's episode is a longer one, and it really is broken up into a couple of different parts. So the first part is just the friendly chat with Burju and me, where we, I invite her to introduce herself, certainly, and I practice asking the questions of the Stoner Story Witch, which are: how do you connect to your wildness? What stories are guiding the pathway to your liberation? And what is resourcing you for collective liberation? So we go into those questions. We give an overview of ACOTAR and the story, particularly the relationship between the love triangle, we'll just say, that arises. And then I kind of jump more into a little bit of me presenting Burju, in essence, like a little book report of the animistic connections and archetypal energies as informed to me by Sophie Strand and her work in The Flowering Wand, as well as a video essay on the romantasy genre itself, especially through Twilight, as told by Natalie Wynn's YouTube channel Counterpoints, which I will link to all of that in the show notes. And yeah, I had a lot of fun researching and kind of creating the outline for this conversation and then having this conversation. So I am really curious to know what lands for those of you listening, what questions, connections, comments you have. As always, please email me at stonerstorywitch@gmail.com with any and all bids for connection, because I really do want to be in a conversation. These are the conversations I wish I could have with everyone. And I'm just sitting here, just kind of in this Sagittarius season. I keep thinking of bonfires. Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign of the zodiac, and so it changes, it moves, and I just think that we can have a bonfire, and my bonfire can be informed by other fires that I have sat by, but then I'm sitting down at my fire, and then now I am talking about the things that I'm tying in the work of attachment with Carmen Spaniola, and romantasy with Natalie Wynn, and Dionysius with Sophie Strand, and ACOTAR of Sarah J. Maas, all with my friend Burju. Like, it just feels like a really lovely metaphor for what it is I'm trying to do here. So if you are here and you're sitting around my bonfire and you just want to let me know that you're here and you're listening and you have connections or comments, absolutely, I want to hear from you. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I really, really hope you enjoy this episode. All right, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Burju. Well, welcome, Burju.
Hi, Kristyn.
Welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I guess, okay, first off, why are you here? Like, what are...
Connection, deeper conversations on things that are common interests.
Yeah.
Exploration.
Yeah.
Challenge, getting out of my comfort zone and
Okay.
talking about things where sometimes I feel like are taboo, or like I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I like something.
Yes. Yes.
And being like, well, why does this have to be something of shame? Why can't it be something that I experience a lot of joy, enjoy sharing ideas and thoughts with another human that I also admire.
Aw.
So yeah, it just felt, my soul said yes, and I listened.
Oh my gosh. I am so glad that your soul said yes and that you listened.
Yes.
So just to introduce you, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm trying to remember to ask everyone, and that is, what identities do you lead with?
Well, she, her, artist, empath, I don't know, rebel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those seem the most fitting at the moment.
Yes.
I think they evolve with the seasons and the times. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in this particular season, like the identities that are leading me. I liked Carmen answered this question a couple weeks ago, where it was like, some people might see me with these identities, but like the ones that I really feel are like, if you think of like being led by something. Yeah. And so yeah.
Oh, and nurturer. That's been a big one for me lately.
Nurturer.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
So.
I also asked you a little bit ahead of time, but I know the questions are a little maybe out there. But the 3 questions that kind of inform my podcast are kind of around this theme of liberation. And the first one is, how do you connect to your wildness? But another way I could put it is like, how do you connect with your inner wisdom or your most intuitive self? And I think maybe what this question is getting at is like, what are practices that you do that help you to connect in that way?
Great question. I think it's always been movement, like moving my body. It doesn't have to be an actual like dance movement. I know, I come from dance, and dance is a big part of my life. But sometimes it's just in shaking or gyrating, or just kind of like, I love fluid circular movement. So sometimes I'll just body wave and whirl, big circles and movements. And I think when I don't do it, it's not just a physical but a mental, like I can feel how disconnected I become. So yeah, movement is a practice. It's always, even when I like, and where I chose to sit, right? Like I'll be like, chair, no. Big expansive bed or floor sounds better to me. Why? I can move, I can stretch, I can feel something, and then I can connect better to the wisdom and the inner parts of myself.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And the next question is, which archetypal energies or stories are guiding the pathway of your liberation? It might be why we're here. It might be why I invited you to come on. But totally no pressure if you're currently
living in a Feyre reality. I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely these like kind of warrior, like a little bit magical, mystical, brave, like put it all out there type humans that just like, that's totally, it's magnetic to me. I just want to be around the change makers, the curse breakers, you know what I mean?
Oh,
like that's what I want to be around. That's what I want to be like.
Yes.
So I think, again, it's seasonal. I think that's just the season I'm in right now.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, and then the final question is, what is resourcing you for collective liberation?
That one was a tough one. I feel like sometimes I think collective liberation always has to be something so loud and outward, and I don't always understand that there's an inward that that is just as valid, just as powerful. And so I'm trying to get back to like the different practices that help me resource collectively, right?
Yes.
Like, so, and that comes with me allowing myself to feel joy, because for especially the better part of the last like year plus, it's been really hard to feel joy without feeling guilt for feeling that joy.
I know exactly what you mean.
And then I feel myself running into the ground, and I'm not able to necessarily be of any benefit in any liberatory acts, my own or collective.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work being done, and the movement that is trying to write more, trying to just play a guitar and just let myself do something different.
Yeah, accessing creative parts
versus like, I'm also kind of like, I gotta stop trying to be a perfectionist about it and be like, oh, I can't, I have to do it this way. No, it doesn't have to be that way. And, so many things. So yeah, so this question was like, well, I could just be here for 3 days discussing all the.
Yeah, well, I think another reason why I think you're on the podcast is our connection to sourdough. I know we've bonded about this before today. You actually are the one that taught me how to make sourdough. So
I was just like, I think you put more flour if it's sticky. I've learned a lot since then, by the way.
And that's what I actually think is really amazing. Back to because like me taking on the sourdough practice was kind of like slaying that perfectionist dragon of like, it has to be perfect. And I've talked about sourdough an awful lot on the podcast. So if
love that,
like, no expectation that I make anybody listen to it, but yeah, so I have to like connect those pieces. And I know that I am also like a dance or movement Rhysand baker, like if it's kind of like, what's the name of the childhood street you grew up on, and what's the name of your first pet or something like that, and then like that's like your pen name or some alter ego or a stripper name or something, and it's just like, oh, I'm a movement Rhysand baker. And I was just thinking, I was like, I bet that this is like the most overlap I've like the seasons of our the seasons of life that we're in right now. It just feels to me like we're very much overlapped on those things like that. And I'm just projecting onto you at this point, but that like for me, the baking is very much an individual practice that, helps me, I don't know, like orient in my day in some way, but then I can also offer it out to my community, and I can do it in a really radical way. And that can also be like a daily practice. And I think you even said that, because since I've started asking these questions, I've realized just how connected resourcing ourselves for collective liberation is us turning into our wildness. Right. Because it's like, you could almost flip the first and the third. It's like, is my movement resourcing me, or is my movement like my devotion to like this like liberatory work, or and so it's just, maybe it's the scale or something, and like if maybe it's that one's more yin and the other one's more yang, one is more inward, the other one's more outward. I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest.
That's okay. It's between the nurturing, the baking nurturing, like being able to feed myself and my family like something homemade that I know the ingredients, that is healthy. I put a lot of love into it, right? Expanding that into the community, friends, family. There's that part that I've definitely, like, I never ever would have called myself a baker. I can throw some things in a pan and throw it in the oven, but I would never have labeled myself a baker.
Right.
So to kind of be like the local sourdough person, like the fact that people are like, you're the bread lady. I'm like,
yep.
Okay. Yeah, I that's new for me, but thank you. Like, that's really cool. I'm just really glad people are enjoying what's being made, right?
Yep.
So I've always been the dancer, the teacher, right? Which is interesting because even though I haven't pursued it, it's almost chasing me as well. So like I'm finding myself like now my daughter's finally like she's found a physical movement that she's connecting with after like asking her last year to like, I love that you do arts and you love to read and you're young and you should move your body. Like find anything that you like that gets you to move your body, like your muscles, right?
Especially since that's so much a part of how you're connecting with your...
Yeah, but I don't want to like force it on her.
Right.
I just like, I didn't care.
Moving is important.
Right. And I didn't care if it was dance. Like I'm like, you want to be in soccer, basketball, like all the things valid, right?
Some embodied practice.
Body practice, some physical body practice that gets you out of body for a second, right? Anyway, she's connected with dance, and then obviously it's very natural for me to fall into dance mom role, right? So now I'm in the studio, now I'm volunteering, helping, and like not even, it's so organic the way you get pulled in, and now I'm like, okay, I think I might have classes coming soon. And again, I'm falling back into that role of teacher coach even a little bit.
Sure.
And when it comes to movement, movement coach. And then as far as resourced by, like, I think the studio, like, is bringing that back, right? Like, it's helping me connect to that number one, right? The movement piece, because I'm doing it for me, but the benefits transcend my personal, like, what I get out of it to, like, the rest of the community. And I love teaching it. I love experiencing it with others, you know?
We are here specifically to discuss ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. It's also something that I've just affectionately been kind of shorthanding as Subversive Smut, which came to me from Sophie Strand, another alliteration.
I love Subversive.
But yeah, just the idea that you can write the most subversive storyline possible, but you just like make it smutty and you put it in fantasy land, and then like you can get away with it. And so I think I think maybe my goal is to almost kind of like pick apart in some ways, like why this A Court of Thorns and Roses is such a compelling story. Like, oh, and I guess the other thing I just want to say too, I'll interrupt myself, is that I had a couple, like several months ago, I had a friend say that they got this book, the first one. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I've seen it before. Like, I think I saw it in some summer read, like, must read things for summer. Maybe like I was like, I think I've seen that. Okay. Like I logged it away. And it's like, I feel like I need the universe to like float things by me a couple times. It's like the third or fourth where it's like, okay, fine, I get it. And then you said that you had read it and you were just like captivated by it. I remember we were walking on the beach and you were talking about it, and I was like, okay, you know what? Like, yeah, I'm gonna get it. And I ended up getting the audiobook download because I forget exactly what my reason was, but anyway, I'll put a pin in that. And I will just say that my reason for starting to even listen to the books is that it is this idea of like, it's a way of gaining intimacy with someone, right? That it's like, okay, I will be able to understand Burju better. I'll be a better friend for Burju if I can just be like, what are the stories that are really, I mean, to me, that are guiding the pathway of your liberation? Like, you wouldn't be loving it. You wouldn't be like wanting to read it every spare minute you have if it wasn't fulfilling something in you. And then it's like, whether it resonates with me or not, it like at least will help me get to understand you better. And so that in and of itself is a good enough reason for me. But then I find myself doing exactly what you're doing. Like once the big kicker in book 2 happens, then I'm just like, well, shit, I need to go back into book 1 now and like parse out everything that I thought I knew.
Right? The breadcrumbs.
Where are all the breadcrumbs? And I must find them. And wait, I'm actually doing a season on a whole different show, but that's also how stories work. That it's just like, okay, I'm doing a deeper dive into this different project. But then there's this other story that's like, but here, I'll resource you. Like, I know, like, you are, like, I can't be resourced by the story that I'm doing the deep dive on. And so, like, I just think of, like, this ACOTAR was just this nice little blessing of something that I could almost escape into. But now I'm just like, but I also just can't help but want to dive. I can't just dip my toe in this story because it's got so much to it. And that I found somebody else, like, you were the reason I read this book. So of course you're going to be among the first on the list that I'm going to get to like want to, like, I don't know, just chat with me about the things that I think are incredible about it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, so it's funny. While my reasons for finding the book are kind of similar, it's not, it's the same thing. I think in ultimately connection I was at a place where my reading list was only filled with nonfiction stuff because I felt like I had to constantly just be learning and growing and unlearning and unpacking and just kind of like I started like early 2020 now, you know, with everything that happened in the pandemic. I had kind of lost reading was just something I always said I didn't have time for, right? With younger children and just everything going on, running a business and whatnot. So it was like I just didn't have a lot of time for it. Anyway, so, and then when I did have time for it, I was like, well, I have so much to learn and unpack. Like I, you know, growing up the way I did, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And with, you know, knowing what patriarchy is, but not understanding what it did, what roles it played in my life. Like the minute I kind of clued onto it, it's like a rabbit, like you can't stop, right? And so you learn more. And then, and I think that's all great and all, but there was something that I was losing in myself. I couldn't pinpoint what by doing just nonfiction, right? Yep. And so, obviously, you know, part of my work is being a lot on social media. I would be on it a lot less if it wasn't part of because I do marketing for my brand, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm on there. So you can't help but kind of get into these little niches within the TikTok and the Instagram community, right? So like I found myself in book talk, like simply because I was doing a trend for my business. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's like a niche, right? Like there's, you know, cooking talk or whatever. Like there's all the different talks, right? On TikTok. So I got into the book talk community, and then this ACOTAR thing kept showing up on my FYP, my For You page. And I was like, I was actually really annoyed with it. And I was like, people are weird. Like, I don't know why they're excited about fairy porn. I don't know. Like, that's what I had summed it down to. Right, you know what I'm saying? Because that's like that was my initial, I was totally judgmental. Judgmental. And then it's interesting because as much as I was judging it, I was so curious. I think the things that are taboo are sometimes the most alluring to us. And part of it comes from me unpacking my own kind of exploration of my, you know, sexuality, my sensual, everything. So part of me was like, oh, that's so weird, but still looking like peeking.
Yes, but
like,
I can't look away.
Right. I couldn't look away. So then the more I kind of interacted with it, the more kind of I led through to people and communities that were having discussions similar to something we're doing here, right? Yep. And they were unpacking the story, and then I kind of got some spoilers because I did that because of my curiosity.
Oh, sure.
And then I was like, now I feel vested. So I'm like, you know what? And I was actually this summer in San Jose with my kids at the bookstore, and they had a big ACOTAR display. It's like the universe was like, you are going to read this series. Like,
it's so true.
It's so weird, right? So then I sit down because my kids were taking forever to look through stuff. And I was like, I'm just going to sit down. And I just picked up the first book and I started reading the first few pages. And I'm the type of person where like, if it's a book or if it's a movie or a series, once I'm like a little bit in, I feel invested.
Yeah.
So even if it's not like, oh, this is so good, I still am too curious. Like I can't leave a story unfinished.
I kind of know what you mean.
It pisses me off.
Yeah.
So I was like, and because like the first book was kind of like I didn't get the whole obsession with Tamlin. It was a little weird to me.
Okay.
But I understood it, and then I wanted to understand why people did, because that's my brain also works like that. Like, why do people this and do that, right? And that applies to everything in the world for me. Like, why
does anybody think anything other than
why are people think this way? Well, like you just wonder why. How do you get there?
Yeah.
What train brought you to that way of thinking, right? So I was like, I'm gonna get through this big, thick book. But it's interesting because I found myself, because the best time for me to read is probably early in the morning, right before kind of I start my day. And then at night before I go to bed, because it's nice to kind of like drift off into fairy tale world and fall asleep dreaming about stuff. And so what's interesting is anytime I read anything before these ACOTAR books is I'd probably get through maybe 5 or 10 pages before I got sleepy.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's because everything's dark too, right? But for some reason, this book kept me up. Like I was like, how did I just go through 100 pages? And it's now midnight and I was trying to go to bed 3 hours ago.
Yep.
And then I was like, something is propelling me. Keep reading. Like there was something beyond the whole love story and that there was there. And maybe it was the main character and her development and what she was experiencing. And something about the lure of this Rhysand character. I was like, there's this dark energy, but I don't know.
Yep.
Something's there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. And it's kind of creepy. And I don't know why I'm drawn to it in a weird way. And I felt like I owed myself the exploration of it.
Yes.
So it just kept me going. Like
I love it.
I couldn't stop.
Yeah, no, and it's so funny how much that almost, and we can give a little bit of an overview of the actual story too in just a moment too, but like how that's almost like mirrored in Feyre's journey of like, okay, like, but there's this thing and like there you have this initial judgment against it, but then like it's just like, it also just compels.
Red flag. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But
okay, so it's also really funny that you shared what you shared as far as like having like that stack of nonfiction books, but then it's like, okay, but I actually just like need to be nourished by like some stories that remind me that like life is to be enjoyed. And like, and anyway, so another piece, and it's another, so I'm actually going to have Sophie Strand on the show, by the way. So so I know I sent you one of her Substacks, and then I know, I'm very excited. But this one came to me in my last season too, and it talks about romantasy, so I almost felt like it was a little bit of a yoo-hoo, like you're going to be talking about subversive smut and romantasy very soon. She writes that the books that she was drawn to were not set in New York City with a cast of relatable and disenchanted millennials. They weren't even real. Most often they were set on Mars, or in what Ursula K. Le Guin calls the generalized otherworld of fantasy, Elfland. They are set in other worlds and yet struck me as being infinitely more real than most of what was passing as realistic fiction. It was in those books that I started to recognize myself. These were people and worlds that took stories and feelings and pain seriously again. They didn't make me feel like a hollow shell. There were protagonists who were really grappling with morality, with illness, with violence, with disempowerment. They grappled with embodiment and desire. It was in romantasy that I finally remembered how revolutionary female desire can be when it is articulated without the anorexic strictures of good literature. And then she just continues, give me smut, give me life force. Not the same angry, disaffected, anti-hero female protagonist of a MFA novella. Give me complex 1,000-page ecologies, not anemic houseplant novellas. And what if when we look directly at our lives disappear, but fantasy and sci-fi approach from the periphery? And that because they take this oblique approach, they often get much closer to the real than our own realism gets. Anyway, she continues that I will obviously be linking to that in the show notes, but I just think of like, how do the stories offer us these like romantasy, these like escapist, we would think, narratives, but they actually can give us this like sideways view into like, okay, but what actually is this in my world, or how can I embody these characters that I love in ways that are accessible to me? And I just fucking love it.
Yeah. That was the juiciest thing when you sent it to me. I was like, yeah.
Oh yeah, I sent that one to you.
There. Yeah. I was like,
good.
That's it right there. And I think it is. So I think that's what it was too. Like with book one for me, I think the like, as you really get into it further and further, it was the grappling with morality that I think was like a very big draw for me, because I think I struggle with that. I mean, I'm doing my own grappling, right? Because I'm like, you know, I run a business, you know, and you know, the choices you have to make daily, right?
Yeah.
Like even, you know, we talk about moving to Costa Rica. We know what effect we're having on local people here. And we also left because we weren't happy where we were. So we're always constantly grappling, like our, you know,
right.
You know, I feel like we always have to draw a hard line when we make a statement about what we believe in, like when it comes to our morals and values. And I think we don't understand that when faced with certain situations, like what do you do? Like when you're faced with the situation of save, you know, the love of your life and the entire kingdom, but you have to like harm 3 people to do that. Like, what do people do? And it's interesting. I don't know if you remember this. I was thinking about this the other day. Did you ever watch that show, The Good Place?
I have. It's been a while, and I didn't finish it.
I didn't
finish
it
a couple
either
seasons
because just life got in the way. But it was so funny because the professor, and I can't remember the name, he was the morality.
Oh yeah.
Like, and he's still like, he was doing the exercise of like, well, choices like
the trolley experiment.
The trolley
kind of thing.
That's
yes.
I was like, it was a train or a trolley or something, right? Like, so it's interesting. So then I just remember thinking about that when I was reading, and I was like, wow, like this is so much more complicated. And I think everything in our society, in our life, when it comes to everything, even things we enjoy, whether it's the politics, the business, the things we get joy of, everything, it feels like it has to be, you're either this or that. You have to be put into these boxes, but we don't fit into boxes or pretty little molds that are perfect, right? And all of us have capacity for obviously good and capacity for evil. I mean, depending on circumstances,
right?
And so, you know, going back to that question of how do people get here, and how did I arrive here and you arrived there? Like, how are we so different? And what were our experiences that got us here, that made us think that this act is okay versus that act not being okay? And yet, where is our ultimate line?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And is there one every time? Because if you were to live that experience all over again, like if Feyre had to live that again, would she have done it? Like, what is it? Hindsight, right? Like in hindsight, knowing what she knew after the fact, would she have still done that? But then again, she also saved Rhysand and everyone else by doing that, right?
I mean, I almost think that like in hindsight she would, but like if she had the foresight to see where she was going to go, she maybe would have said no because it would have been too scary. Wait, you mean to tell me that if I, you know, shoot this wolf, then I'm going to then like die and all the things that happen, you know, like that. It's almost like sometimes, maybe, I guess my takeaway on that is like, you wouldn't make sometimes you wouldn't make the next steps that are necessary for you because you're so scared of where that journey is going. And it's not that it's not a scary journey, but by the time you get there, you're going to look back and be like, okay, but this was worth it. And I think for me, it's like, well, what's the compass that's guiding you? What are the values that you're living by? And like, yes, absolutely. White supremacy culture tells us that there's this like binary thinking, like you're either this or you're that, and there's good and evil. And it's like, no, like it's like perfection is not on the menu. Like there is no purity or innocence in late stage racialized capitalism. It's just trade-offs. And it's just, okay, like how can I do the least amount of harm or the most amount of good? And hopefully both of those things at the same time, knowing that like every step is a grapple. And 100%. There is a lot of grappling modeled here. For people who are like, maybe are listening to this and don't actually want to read it, but kind of want to like get the gist. Maybe they've already been spoiled or whatever, and they're willing to just... We're going to focus our conversation on the first two books, because what I really want to look at is the love triangle. There's a love triangle that happens between the main character, Feyre, and kind of the first fairy male that she meets. His name is Tamlin. And then there's this bad boy fairy that comes in, and his name is Rhysand. I will just say that, yeah, because I was listening to the audiobooks, and I don't know if this was purposefully done by the director, because it was like a cast, so every character had their own voice. And maybe it was because, maybe kind of like you, I was like, okay, people are saying they like this, but I thought I had the story pegged. I thought that this was going to be a story where the heroine stays true to that first love. And so I was expecting like, you know, an Outlander or a Twilight, right? Like she's just Team Edward, and it doesn't matter how great Jacob is. Like it's always Edward. It's always been Edward.
Right.
But there was also just something about the voice of Tamlin in the audiobook just like didn't quite do it for me. So I was just like, okay. It was just easy for me to I was maybe listening to 70% of the first book. But when Rhysand's voice was on, I really liked that voice. And even just the way, and you can get this in the book too, like the way that she talks about Rhysand is that there is always this like alluring piece about him. He has like this, you know, come hither voice, like that there's just such that like the way she describes him is that he's the most attractive or handsomest male she's ever seen before. So obviously there's some big breadcrumbs there that they're planting the seeds in us that we are supposed to like this guy, but we're not supposed to like this guy.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And so then, yeah, we find out that in this fairy world, you can fall in love with someone, but there's actually like a destination or a fated connection that you can have with a person that they refer to as a mate. Like there's a mating bond, and whether you actually have sex with that person ever, it doesn't even matter. But it's like you just like you can actually find out that someone is your mate just upon looking at them. And in some case, but sometimes it shows itself in different ways. And we find out that this Rhysand character, who is kind of like taunting and kind of like almost a bully in some ways to Feyre in book 1, we find out in book 2, once she saves the entire fairylands and she dies. She dies. Her human body dies. She gets brought back again as a fairy. She then, she saves the entire fairy world. So then she gets to be whisked off into Tamlin's arms, and he becomes like more and more controlling. And again, I'm still thinking at this point, that this is Edward, and he's going to eventually come around because of, again, and this is something that Rhysand did in the first book, where he makes Feyre, he saves Feyre's life in these trials that she's doing. He restores her health so that she can keep going, but she has to go stay with him for a week every month. Yeah. And I remember being like, ooh, this is going to be good for the next book. I will get to hear this voice again, in the next book. And so I was just like, okay, like maybe, her going away to Rhysand will, give her some perspective that will then help her to advocate better for herself in this Tamlin situation. I was just like, obviously it's going to be Tamlin. But then we find out that, like Tamlin is just a controlling, traumatized man, from the events of book 1. And I don't know, maybe just being a patriarchal male. And then Feyre, in these, moments that she is leaving with Rhysand, like she starts getting more and more connected to him, and then finds out that, oh my gosh, shocking spoiler alert, Rhysand is her mate. This whole time we thought that like, oh, one of these days she and Tamlin that will be like in book 3 where their mate bond finally like reveals itself or something. That was what I was totally expecting. So then the idea that Rhysand has this whole other story of what his perspective was and why on earth was he taunting Feyre in book 1, that this book is really more of a drawn out Pride and Prejudice, which is, you know, like where, you know, Elizabeth, for those of you who don't know Pride and Prejudice, like there's this Mr. Wickham that is super, you know, you want her to be with. And then it actually turns out that the guy that she was resisting this whole time is like the best fit for her. And the first guy is actually a douchebag or whatever. Or so we're led to believe. But anyway, there's more I can flesh out there, but is there anything you want to share just about, I guess, that's what we're focusing our conversation on, the relationship and kind of like the events that happen in like the relationships of Feyre, Tamlin, and Rhys. That's where we're focusing our conversation today.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack there. I think one of the first things is I did at one point find myself hoping, not that they would be together, but I did hope that Tamlin would heal. He just needs healing. And I think just in my own experiences with patriarchy and what it's done to men in our society, I want people to heal, because I think while he turned out to be a complete douche, he really did love her, and it's just sad to see that he just doesn't know how to be what she needed, right? And then with Rhysand, I loved how, like you said, we were able to see his perspective of almost everything from book 1 and book 2 when he told the stories. And I love how the love for her was so deep. I mean, ultimately he was like ready to let her go, right? But he also was like there for her when she was like, someone save me. Like he saved her when she died. Like he had like tethered right there, so that with that imaginary thread, right? And then then he saved her at the wedding, and he saved her in other little ways, right? Like when she went to Colin Mai or whatever.
Oh yeah, the Callan May.
I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. The audiobooks
Since I've
helpful.
listened to the audiobooks, I know how
this
it's
is
pronounced.
my interpretation of just I've only read them.
Yep, I know the feeling.
And so, and then just like I just love that he taught her to read in such an obnoxious way. Like when he was just like, "I'm the sexiest man," or whatever he was saying, like all this stuff, and she's like, "Oh my god, this dude." And just like so many ways that he was presenting himself as who I don't want to say that she needed, but was meant to kind of, because they're equal. Like she's just as powerful in the relationship, right? Like it's not like a damsel in distress being saved by her dark knight prince. Like it's none of that, because it's always her choice, what she wants. She had to find her path. There was, you know what I mean?
Yes.
She had to find her own strength, her own power.
Yes. He even says that like at the Weavers, right? Because she almost shits the bed. He like there's this one challenge. He's like, okay, I think you actually have all these like a little bit of power from every High Lord,
right?
We're gonna test this though. We're gonna take you to this place. Like this woman seems like she's the Weaver in the woods, and so she just anyway, Feyre needs to go in there and find some object that is linked to Rhysand, right, that like is his object, to see if she can identify it. It's like sneak in and sneak out, and she kind of like forgets for a moment that like she does have powers, that she like it's almost like she lets her dysregulated nervous system like get the better of her in those moments. And Rhys actually didn't save her in that instance. He's like, you need to remember that you can do this. Right. I forget where there was some later. Maybe it was then when they were trying to recover the book, and they almost like didn't make it. I forget exactly when it was, but there was some time where he almost is angry with her. He's like, you forgot, like you need to stop forgetting that like you are powerful, like you don't actually need me to save you. You need to remember that you actually have these powers and that you can use them. And like what a corrective experience for a genre that I would poo-poo as being like trying to make women think that they're these like damsels in distress that like need to be rescued by this man. And it's like, no, like you're actually a very empowered woman. You have some of every High Lord's power, and you said no to this relationship that was going to try to keep your power hidden, try to control you, And Rhysand wants nothing more than for you to just do what it is you want to do and be to the full power that you're able. And yeah, that just feels subversive as fuck.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. There's so much. I find a lot of intimacy in that too. Like, yes, there's a lot of, there's smut, right?
There's definitely sex.
Right. But I think that there's this like amazing intimacy of like, giving her the space to find her path, to find her power, to grow into it, to find her voice. Like she's always had it. I mean, she was the youngest, right, sibling, and she was the one that was literally keeping them from starvation, right, going out into the woods and stuff. So, but I don't think she knew how powerful she was, really, really. Like, besides, you know what I mean? So, like, having, I don't know. To me, that's just as intimate. Like, to me, I've always said that intimacy doesn't just come physically to me. Like, it's very much emotional and intellectual as well. And if someone's not participating in that kind of development, like emotional and intellectual development with me, then like the rest doesn't flow for me, right? So like, I don't care how much juicy sex is in the book. Like, it wouldn't have been it wouldn't have landed as good as it was, right? Because you're kind of constantly like, you wonder what's going to happen right now. Like, is he going to barge in and save her? No, he's not. She got to figure it out. And then she's like, gets mad at him. Like, it's like, it's like the best. And it's like the banter, the back and forth, and even that, just banter. Like, she's able to just like always put him in his place, and it's just, it's nice to read and witness. And I don't. So speaking of like I just feel like reading this book compared to other books, fiction and nonfiction, obviously you're imagining or you're visualizing when you're reading or listening to the audiobooks. But I don't know what it is about this world, this whole Prythian and the world. It's I've never experienced reading and then imagining so vividly.
Interesting.
Like, it's very colorful to me. Nice. And I'm trying to understand why it's so much more vivid. And I don't think it's just because of the way it's being described. Obviously, you get descriptions, right? Like, the author's like, and the environment looks like this, and this is what they're wearing, this is their aura. But between the dialogue, between the, the characters and how they've been developed, and then obviously all the descriptions of it.
She's a painter. She's a very descriptive with her words.
Right. Yes.
Maybe
all
that's
of it
part
together. It just makes it so vivid and so colorful. And that's what I think you said something earlier, right? That same to the article. Like, it feels more real sometimes than the things that are nonfiction that are more real, right? Like, I can't relate to these. Even though I'm a younger Gen X. Like older millennial, I'm kind of like Zennial, whatever they call that. Yep. Is that what it's called? Right. But it's hard sometimes to relate to that, even though that is quite literally my experience. But I related more to this fantasy world. It just felt more real, more vivid, more lifelike. And maybe it's just coming from a desire of wanting to create a world like that around me as well.
Maybe it's just, maybe it's just noteworthy. Maybe we don't even need to know why, but it's just like, I can just make note of like, this is a really like my inner wisdom, my wildness, my like some parts of me are really resonating, are really able to envision, really want to play, really want to like create, like help co-create this world in my brain, behind my eyes, I think you mentioned this too about the intimacy that I think is just, and we'll just keep dropping more tidbits as necessary to kind of just fill in the conversation. But what I think is really interesting with Feyre and Rhys, partly we get some plausible deniability about like this bond, this mating bond that the two of them have because of this like bargain that they made when he saved her life in the first book. And then in exchange, she needs to spend 1 week every month with him. That there's like a bargain bond that they have. And that there's also this communication that they have back and forth. It almost feels like, like how people would like text back and forth, kind of like the way it's kind of like written in the book anyway. But that Rhys his big power is that he's a deimati. Like he can read people's minds, and he can kind of almost control their minds. And he can also just like have a conversation with you on like in a mental without needing to actually talk. And I think that there's a lot of presumed intimacy in that too. The fact that that for a little while he can read her mind until he teaches her how to like, shield herself. And then she also has this skill too. But, I just think that that's another really interesting, symbol of intimacy that this book has. So it's just like, oh my gosh, like there are these characters that like they both are rare in their ability to read each other's minds, and they can read people's minds, and they can read each other's minds. So like that grants them a certain level of intimacy. They also have this bond, which is this like really rare thing that's connecting the two of them. Like, oh my gosh, that destiny. It's like on so many of these counts, it's just like, oh my gosh, like what an exceptional partnership this is, that of course it's compelling. And then like you say, of course, then, when we finally get them in bed together, it's like all the more juicy because of all of the emotional and
she quite literally glows, right? Like it's like
it's true too.
Everything. I was like, yeah, I mean, everything is connected. Like their mind, body, and soul literally connected. They're bonded through ink, even. Like there's, I mean, all the ways you can imagine being connected to another human being to choose as a partner or a mate. Like they have that, right? So, and then like it's beautiful because it's like I don't know. I think I want that, right? Like I want to be that deeply connected, to my partner, right?
Absolutely.
I want to be able to,
who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't want to be?
I want to be able to look at my partner and literally almost have a conversation just by looking at them, like we're in each other's heads, right?
Yeah.
Like, and just like I know exactly what you're saying right now. I know exactly what you're feeling. And I'm not saying it's all positive. Like even when they argue, like it's about real communication.
Authenticity.
Yeah. Unfiltered. Like I can be me, you can be you. We hash it out.
Yeah.
We figure it out, but we're connected that way, right?
Yeah.
Like we're committed to nurturing that connection too, right?
Yeah. And I'll put a pin in this for now because I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but also Rhysand's awareness of his own power and how he uses that power to like kind of redistribute, I would say, like the power within Prythian or within his own court. That he always wants Feyre to be like a partner to him, even before they're officially mated, even when she's still like kind of side-eyeing him. He always is like, you choose. He has the ability to, he has the right to use his power in all these ways, but like and it's clear that Prythian is, even though it's this fantasy world, patriarchy is still alive and well because there's only high lords. There's never been a high lady. And then of course, once they mate, then Feyre becomes the very first ever high lady who is his equal in every possible way. I mean, oh my God, like, how is this not amazing? Like he has like the symbol of Prythian tattooed on his knees as a symbol, like I will never bow down for I won't bow down for anything other than my court, than my land, except when he's like servicing Feyre, like, right? Like, it's just like, oh my God, like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, yes, like I want to be on an equal level with somebody who's not like denying their power, but they're willing to like share it with me, All right, so in this next section here, Burju, I'm basically just going to present you with a lot of thought vomit, a lot of connections that I've been making with this A Court of Thorns and Roses, as well with the work of Sophie Strand and the Flowering Wand, as well as the ContraPoints' video on the romantasy genre, but it's through the eyes of Twilight.
Excited.
Yeah. So ContraPoints says in her video that we need to remember that romantasy is fiction, and it is often in these cases of these romantasies, it's this female protagonist is awakened by her desire for sex, and there's some bad boy is awakened in his desire for love. And one of the things that she talks about in this video, but I think it applies to even just what we were talking about with the ACOTAR of, I remember certainly when I was reading Twilight feeling guilty for enjoying Twilight because, you know, it was very much controlling, and the controlling guy wins her in the end. Yeah. And, you know, like without necessarily reforming his ways. It is, I would say Twilight is less subversive than A Court of Thorns and Roses and then the Court of Mist and Fury have been. But it's really important to remember that like these are fictional worlds, and that there is a history of people trying to tell women what they should and should not enjoy. That like, oh, women should just read these things instead. Yeah. And one of the things that I really liked that Natalie Wynn talks about is that, you know, to remind us that, you know, the question that we're really trying to get at here is like, what is the purpose of art? Right. She says it can either be a moral education that instructs us in proper and virtuous conduct. It can be a mirror of reality that reflects life as it is. And it can be an escapist fantasy that's primarily for entertainment. And of course, I would say like, if it's entertaining, then it can also be resourcing towards collective liberation. Right. So anyway, again, I think there can be a connection between like, you know, what is virtuous conduct? Anyway, but as I was just listening, again, like I highly recommend, if anybody has 3 hours to spare, that ContraPoints video is beautiful. But I really liked then watching or listening to A Court of Thorns and Roses and thinking of Rhysand as almost like this retribution for anybody who is Team Jacob. Where it was just like, but there was like a better option all along, really. And so, yeah. And I think for me, just really recognizing like, you know, that there's the trope of like the forever faithful, but then there's also this trope of like, oh, this person that I thought I loved actually, you know, turns out that I can change and I can grow with what it is that I want, which then leads to the next point, which is about desire. And that every romantasy or every romance, the plot is basically just desire deferred, and that it's this idea that there has to be a barrier, and that often like lust is the barrier to love. And I know that's certainly the case in Twilight, but in ACOTAR we have this triangle that Natalie Wynn cites is Anne Carson from the book Eros the Bittersweet. But we have in one corner of the triangle, we have the lover. And then in another corner is the good girl, who is actually the barrier. And then in the other corner, we have the bad girl. And the bad girl is the beloved. But of course, it's the same girl. Like, it's the good girl part of the bad girl that's actually like the barrier of the Rhysand and Feyre connecting. Which is actually kind of funny because there is this symbol between Rhysand and Feyre when they make their bargain together, where she gets like this, like they both just get this huge like full sleeve tattoo on their left arm, because these bargains are always depicted via these huge tattoos. And I just think like, you know, if we think of things in terms of symbols, like a tattoo is 100% like symbolic for kind of this like badness, right? And the other thing that I just think is really interesting with this desire part, if we're breaking down these romantasies into their parts, Anne Carson is quoted as saying that the real subject of love poems isn't actually the beloved, but it's like the hole that is filled by whatever that symbol is. So like if the symbol is this lover, we actually know from the beginning of the book of the first book, the thing that Feyre wants more than anything is just like enough money and enough time to be able to paint. Yeah. She's not even a romantic. Nope. She does not give a shit about being with any guy. Nope. She just wants to paint. So it's like, and what is paint? It's connection with your creativity. It's, I would say, you know, communing with your most intuitive self, your part living out your destiny as a part of creation. And that's all she wants. But then she meets Tamlin, and Tamlin becomes this symbol of, because he has the money, he has the resources, he gives her the space to paint, he takes care of her family. And I don't think we said this, but it is very much Beauty and the Beast vibes. Yes. Like it is 100%. It is a retelling of the Beauty and the Beast, which is obviously troublesome because you're kidnapping this person. But like in Beauty and the Beast, she gets to she gets to read, she gets to have the spare time to do the things she loves to do. And so then Tamlin becomes that symbol. And so then she says she loves Tamlin, but then at the end of book 1, she's no longer interested in painting. She all she sees is blood. Anytime she's bringing out her paints, she's just traumatized and she can't connect to that creativity. But now she's like, well, but I'm on this boat. I guess I better just keep going in this direction. I'm on the Tamlin boat now. I'm connected to this symbol that I thought was going to bring me this thing. And it worked well for me in book 1, but it's book 2 and this isn't going well. And then we get Rhysand coming in. And even then, like, she's not even painting again until way later in book 2, but she's at least started, like, we start seeing her notice things and be like, ooh, I could paint that. Which then leads me into a little bit of just the attachment piece. And so when I've had Carmen Spaniola on the podcast before, and she's talked a lot about secure attachment, and anybody who's listened to my podcast knows that I talk about secure attachment as being safe, seen, secure, and soothed. So it's engendering that in yourself and being able to cultivate it in someone else. And even with the more than human world, that we can feel connected and secure through kind eyes, vocal prosody, safe touch, shared rhythm, and ingestion behaviors like eating and drinking. So I think of scene, and I kept on thinking of Titanic, which is just another really great romance. But when Jack Dawson is doing his drawings, Rose tells him, like, you see people, you really see people. And she asks him, I want you to draw me like one of your French girls, wearing this, wearing only this. But it's like, that is a symbol of, I want you to see me. I want you to actually know who I am. I want you to see who I really am. And that Feyre gets to do that. Like, what is it? I think what I'm really trying to say is that what Feyre really brings to the table for these men is a sense of being seen, but also the freedom and safety that they can cultivate for her to feel safe enough to be able to see them in that way, or them, then I guess beholding her work when she's done with it. I just think that what I really like about ACOTAR, I guess what I'm trying to say is the role that creativity has to play. And I know we even talked a little bit about Rhysand almost being, Rhysand and Tamlin as being symbols for her relationship to her creativity or her creative self. We also see that the very first indication of their bond was him watching her paint. Yeah. He got visions of these paints, just the works. He said he just saw the paintings, and then he saw that there was a hand. Yeah. And then as time went, he realized that oh my gosh, it's not just a hand, it's a human hand. And and then he starts piecing all this together before they even meet. And then, when she's in the, and then the trauma of being under the mountain kind of separates her from her creativity. And while she's under the mountain, she's about to break. And, just oh my gosh, this is just succumb to the despair. And Rhysand is sending her music through the bond that they have. And so there just is this this shared love of creative things, of art, of the beauty of music. And then, oh my God, the fact that the very first time they actually consummating like their mating bond, that's what it is after she's had like an entire week of solitude in a cabin in the woods just painting. She finally is able to paint, and it's not until this mating bond is clear that it's because she kind of like feels like she's slapped in the face by the realization that, oh my gosh, he's my mate. Wait, I don't know how to even sort this out. I just need solitude. But then the paints are there, and then she just loses herself to this embodied practice and creative practice and liberatory practice of painting. And then he of course comes up, and then they make love on the kitchen table, and like they're just like all covered in paint. And I'm just like, if that is not like a reclaiming your creative practice metaphor, I just don't know what is.
Yeah, that's actually perfect.
Yeah, I can come up for air a little bit. Do you have anything you want to say?
No, I'm enjoying this ride.
Okay.
This is great. No, I'm following, and this resonates for sure.
I'm going to go back, I think, a little bit to this idea of the third point that ContraPoints makes about romantasy is like the fantasy element. And I know this was something that we kind of grappled with a little bit of like, you know, some of the things that Rhysand did were very, like consent was curious, right? Like he dresses her up in scandalous ways and has her go to these parties. This is Under the Mountain. This is in book 1. This is when he's kind of actively taunting her, but then also kind of under the table helping her. So it's a little bit like this like disorganized attachment, I would say, like this come here, go away. Like he's kind of nice, but then he's also kind of like making her dress up and and then giving her wine. So then she'll like forget everything that happens. But she can also tell, what she does remember, she doesn't like remember that anything bad happens, and she can tell based on this body paint that like she has not been touched anywhere other than like just around her waist and her hands. So that like gives us enough of like this indication of like that we can in the future forgive Rhysand, that like he wasn't like a total like taking advantage of her. But anyway, this fantasy element that Natalie Wynn talks about in ContraPoints is there's this book called My Secret Garden, written by Nancy Friday, who did this big study to try to be like, what are women's sexual fantasies? Like what are the most common? And like by and large, the ravishment fantasy, which is defined as being forced by men to do a deliciously awful thing, because it absolves women from fault and it gratifies their physical desire without the emotional baggage of shame, guilt, and anxiety, or the culpability of that desire. So it's like, because we live in these patriarchal worlds that would judge us for like, you know, we could judge Feyre for like wanting Rhysand too soon, because those of us that aren't yet ready to let go of Tamlin are going to be like, oh, this trollop, this. But because like, oh, she's kind of bound, she kind of like, she can't help it, she's this prisoner, there's this process is called this disavowal, and it's constructing fantasy situations where your desires are gratified without having to assert or even having to acknowledge that desire. So that like deep down, you know, like the wish fulfillment is to like be this desired person. Like we know that Rhysand is powerful. We know he's scary, and like, oh, but like Feyre is getting this like extra special attention every night. Of course we don't want it. Of course she hates it, and we also hate it, but it's also 100% like this number one desire. And they gave us enough little breadcrumbs throughout to be like, the way that she describes him is just like enough intrigued, enough compelled, that then when we get Rhys's story to be like, oh, that entire thing was a ruse to try to make Amarantha think he was just taunting Tamlin, and that he actually was able to like be close enough to her to kind of like keep eyes on her and protect her from the guards who were like, you know, basically tormenting her in the off hours. Like the ways that he was actually, it's this, she says that it's this rescue fantasy that also has an element of a disavowal. Like in a way he is rescuing her, but it's also by like a little bit of that ravishment of like dressing her up. Like it is like braiding together just the disavowal of like of her doing this thing that like maybe she kind of doesn't want to do, but it's this double disavowal because it's like he honestly kind of doesn't want to be doing it in this way. It's just a mask he has to wear. And then like that whole, all the masks come off then in the third book to be like, oh my gosh, and it was all for love and it was all for this bond. And another thing that I thought was interesting that she talks about with that these disavowals are not just sexual, that a lot of times the controlling fantasies are really just about a competent person being able to like make the decisions, because like how exhausting is it to be like, what are we having for dinner? And like, well, how are we going to live out our values? And like, how are we going to like survive in late stage capitalism? And it's like 100% like Rhysand has a coherent plan for like how they're going to fight against injustice and oppression and what are the battles and where are the battles. And so I also just think that that's interesting. There's also a disavowal in capitalism, and we see a little bit of that here, a disavowal in like this forced feminization, like her being forced to like wear these clothes that actually like totally like feel fun and flirty and feminine and super comfortable, and like she could escape at a moment's notice. Like the way she even talks about the night court clothes when she's in this, still associating herself with the spring court. And yeah, it's like that you want this stuff, but you don't want to be seen as materialistic, right? Of course, Rhysand is overpaying her when she's, when she first signs on to like whatever it is that she's doing for the night court, to be a part of the court. And like, of course, like he's wanting to just like buy her anything she could possibly want. And it's like, because we do live in capitalism, and the idea of not needing to worry about these things is 100% a thing that anybody would fantasize about. And so that just basically that fantasy is a tool for overcoming guilt, shame, responsibility, anxiety, and other obstacles in the way of our pleasure. And I think ACOTAR really, really hits that. But the one thing I also did want to say is that like, for me personally, a growth edge that I would have for the for romantasy genre, and maybe it's not even like the genre can still be what it is, but that we need to remember that when we're looking at romantasy, we need to take it less literal and more psychological, that these are symbols, right? That it's like we have these rich men wanting you, because these rich men, it's this shame negating fantasy that most people carry shame and insecurity, but that there's like somebody that has a lot of this value that like looks at you and can see you fully and wants you and will, like that you have value and that you matter. And that I think it's just important for me to say that like the desire to just be associated with the richest people ever is just something that I just want to name, that I just don't think that like that's like a healthy thing that anybody should be taking literal. That I just want to just like be like, let's just acknowledge that to survive in late stage capitalism, we do need money, and we do need like enough of it to not like let that drive our day, to let that create enough safeness for us to be able to create. But that like the answer to doing that is not to actually have the levels of wealth that Rhysand has. Like I do have notes on, I have a lot of questions as to how Rhysand can be as wealthy as he is when he doesn't take a tithe from his people. Like that there is a fantastical element to like, then where is that wealth coming from? Who is being exploited? What lands are being extracted from? Like wealth comes from the earth. And to me, there's just that there is an awareness of wealth doesn't come from nowhere. And you can't like be this liberatory guy that just totally gives everything to your people, but then you also have several palaces and all this wealth. Like it like that is like a capitalistic fantasy. And it's just really important. Like I say, Natalie Wynn says that we need to take these things as less literal and more psychological. And what she was talking about specifically is like these ravishment. Like, it's not that these women actually want to be raped. They want to be ravished. That's what a great job Sarah Maas does with getting us to become Team Rhysand at the end of book 1. Like, we really are supposed to be feel pretty sketchy about him, like knowing that he's with Amarantha, and you know, he like got it, like he comes off a little bit scary. However, when Feyre goes under the mountain, if we look at attachment as being you know, the kind eyes, the vocal prosody, safe touch, shared rhythm, and eating and drinking, that when she goes under the mountain and she sees Tamlin, like Tamlin literally gives her nothing. Like, he's sitting there, he doesn't even like glance her way, he doesn't say anything to her. She finds out that he like stands up for one of his friends, but like he is just, he says he literally is responding to her in like no discernible way. And we kind of have plausible deniability, or we kind of can be like, oh, maybe we can write that off because like his hands are tied. Maybe he's trying to protect her. Maybe he doesn't. Okay, so like we don't really know, but still, Feyre's little soft animal of her body is not getting any sort of contact nutrition, is not getting any sort of attachment needs met from this guy under the mountain. But meanwhile, we have Rhysand, and Rhysand and her continue to have their banter. Like, they're going back and forth. Like, even when she's in the middle of fighting that worm, like, she goes out of her way to, like, flick him off or, like, say, fuck you or something. You know, it's just like she dislikes him in such a way that she's continuing to engage with him and not just totally write him off. And, like, even her interior dialogue doesn't seem like she actually hates him. She's just, like... she's like annoyed with him in this way that she just like can't help but kind of like obsess about, like, oh, how annoying, like the hate to love pipeline that we love so much. And yeah, and then I would say that, like, as far as safe touch goes, like, there is this safe enough touch that even though they're like this whole circumstance, I mean, she's like, they're all getting tortured down there. He has some power, but he's not using that power to overpower her in a physical way. He actually uses his power to heal her. He risks being caught by healing her. He even defends her from the guards who were going to torture her. And he's like, hey, like, you know, no more of that. Just leave her be. We even see him, like, again, it seems weird to call this like the safe touch, but a common thing that they end up doing is it's a theme where they lick each other's tears.
Yes, I noticed that.
Which I think is interesting because another theme of this book, I think, is that they become fairies, like that, and I think that it's like this idea that they are a little bit more animalistic than human. And so maybe there's something to that, but that, like, he knows, like, she's crying so hard, and he goes to her cell and he like wants to kind of snap her out of it. Like, he's doing things, he's trying things. And he ultimately decides, like, oh, I'm going to lick the tears off her face because I would rather mobilize her into her anger at me than to just go down into this pit of despair and hopelessness. And then just like, I know I said before when we were talking about intimacy, but how he uses that mind connection that they have to soothe her after that second trial in the first book, Under the Mountain. She's like about to break, and he's like, nope, just stand up, just like walk away, like, you know, like, you got the, yep, deep breaths, you know. And then tracking her throughout the bond, like being able to like know when she's okay, when she needs him to send her music. Sarah Maas does a good job that, like, by the time Rhys comes to call in on the bargain for the first time, like, we're pretty excited for her to get away from Tamlin. And I was excited to read the second book to see, okay, what's going to happen? Like, we need to see this guy. And it's, I don't know. So for me, it was just like the strategic use of that contact nutrition and those benchmarks of secure attachment that really, I just always like to talk about contact nutrition in the wild. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, I love
Do you want to take a beat here?
Do you feel like this is all, I mean, I know authors definitely have a massive process. They don't just sit and write necessarily. Like they map things out.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a plan in place.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm sure things evolve and sway. Like it doesn't necessarily always end up a straight path, right? You're like, oh, yeah, I might take this turn. But there's a whole mapped out, right? And so all this stuff that we're kind of discussing, I wonder if that was premeditated sometimes. Yes. You know what I mean? How much of it and to what degree? And then how do you and that I've always said that writers, people that are word wizards, right? Like they have this ability to make people feel and think, right? So whether you're writing, lyrics for music, author of a book, or great writers for a show, the fact that you can make people go on this path of thought, like a journey. Yeah. Like I really do think they are like the wizards of our time, right?
Oh, like totally.
They are the magicians, right? Like, yeah. And so, as we're talking about all these things, like all of it's, so depending on our experiences through our lives or what we've read, obviously we're going to find different ways we connect and dissect these things, right? Mm-hmm. So I just always wonder that then what was the actual intent of the person that wrote it? Like did they even know that we would have multiple different versions of these conversations?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like on a meta level, it's like we can look at this story as a metaphor for creativity and Feyre being connected to, her painting and being able to see the world that way. And we can see the creativity as a metaphor for her intimacy and attachment with the things that she's beholding, and a way of, you want to paint that which you love, what you want to honor. But then it's also just like, okay, but this story in and of itself is a creative work. And I believe that any creative work, I'm an animist, so I believe that anything we create kind of takes on a life of its own. And so like Sarah J. Maas is like the person who like birthed this thing into the world, but like it is not hers any more than, like a kid is the property of their parent, like it's going to have its own personality. It's going to have its own thing. So I'm really curious to read like behind the scenes things and like what was the author's intention. And I also always just take it with a grain of salt because it's like, it is just as much my story as it is. I mean, I'm not earning money from the story in late stage capitalism. Like I don't own it in that way, but like, oh, I definitely own this story, or like this, like I am in relationship with this story as much as anyone else who has been up way past when they wanted to go to bed. You know what I mean? Like, because it's just like, if it speaks to you, then it is of you, like it resonates in you. And there's archetype, I'm going to talk about it in a second here, but like there's archetypal forces that Sarah Maas is wielding that like existed long before we existed. So to even say that like, oh, because she wrote the book, like, I mean, no, like these themes of romance and of fantasy have been, I mean, tale as old as time. Mm-hmm. But the fourth thing that Natalie Wynn talks about in this romantasy is the use of is how power is wielded, and in this ContraPoints video, she talks about that there's always this default hetero sadomasochism, and she calls it DHSM, and it's this association that like with like all things that are masculine and all things that are feminine, and it's like the association that masculine means men. It means active. It's the subject. It's the lover. It's giving. It's the pursuer. It's the predator. It's the dominator. It's the possessor, the conqueror, the penetrator, the voyeur. And whereas the female is always a woman, she's passive. She's the object. She's the beloved. She's receiving. She's the one who's pursued. She's the prey. She's the subjected. She's the possessed, the surrendered one. the penetrated one, and she's the exhibitionist. And one thing that Natalie says in this is that versatility is as close to sexual equality as we can really get. And so I know one thing that we talked about, which I think I'm going to get to here, is just that that there is a subversion of that power, that Rhys has power and Feyre doesn't, and there's other people in this world. There's like the Illyrian race, that Rhys is actually half Illyrian. There are lesser Fae and high Fae. There are humans are like really shat upon, like by the fairy groups, worlds. And even among the fairy worlds, like say patriarchy still exists. Like Rhys's number 2 and number 3 in command are both women, and that there were like certain high lords that, you know, he kind of like lost some social clout with, because he was actually willing to be like, no, but I'm going to have these women be leading with me and be my second and third in command. One thing I wanted to talk about, though, and maybe you'll just kind of have to go with me here, is so Sophie Strand has this book called The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the god Dionysus. And I feel like there's a lot of Dionysian qualities in Rhysand that I'm going to just take a moment and celebrate, I guess. So one thing that Sophie Strand writes is that Dionysus is a foreign god, that he always kind of like comes up, like he's introduced into these ecosystems as kind of like, who are you and where did you come from? And so certainly our very first introduction to Rhysand is that he is at this Callan May festival, and he's all the fairies that she knows have been cursed to wear these masks, but he's not wearing a mask. And he's, you know, beautiful. He's a beautiful man, most gorgeous man she's ever seen. Dionysus himself is actually a pretty, like, I don't know, kind of androgynous, or at least like very gender bendy, which I think we can also say it's that he's fully, that Dionysus is fully comfortable in a softened and female expression of the divine masculine. And I know I sent this to you, and I'm going to find it here. This Substack, Why Religious Tools Don't Work for Women. And it's by Celeste Davis, and I will obviously link this in the show notes. But it's actually a summary of, I think, a talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about the degraded masculine is putting the wants and needs of the self above the good of the whole. It's conquering, hoarding wealth, power hungry, greedy, selfish, and violent. It's this, I'm going to take whatever I want just because I can, and not considering the needs of others. It's easy for me to read that and think of that is Tamlin, right? Yes. That like Tamlin is this expression of this degraded masculine. Yes. We see that he needs to just be the high lord that his father always was, not questioning that there's a tithe, even if you don't need the things, like it's going to spread a bad message if you're not like at the hierarchical top. Then we have the divine masculine, and that's putting other people's needs above our own. It's that I could hoard resources, but I choose to share. I could have power, but I refuse it. I look out for the whole instead of just myself. It's kindness, forgiveness, selflessness, compassion, empathy, listening, and giving. And of course, I would make the argument that that is more of what we see in Rhysand, his willingness to, again, want to redistribute power, resources, wealth in the ways that he can. I still have notes. I still have questions on how he has just as much wealth as he apparently can when he's as generous as he supposedly is. He still seems like he does an awful lot of killing, that I'm still working on. What is the killing an actual symbol of? Is it just like a steadfastness to your values? But it's just, I gotta hold that tenderly, when, we do live in a violent world. But then they also say that there's this degraded feminine, this degraded feminine that overgives, overserves, and is overly selfless, used and abused. I exist to give and serve. In the face of bad behavior, I will stay silent and continue to please. I will not ruffle any feathers or make anyone upset. I look out for the whole at the expense of myself. Everyone else's needs are prioritized above my own, accommodating others' desires, even when the resentment is silently oozing out of your eyeballs. Think of the moms on all the TV shows, probably your own mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. And certainly that resonates. Certainly we see that in how Feyre is dealing with Tamlin in the very beginning, or in the very beginning of book 2. We see her saying things like, I would fight, but I would say something, but it's just going to be easier for me not to. Right. Like, she has this impulse of where we know she's going to banter with Rhys. Like, if Rhys were to say something, she's going to call him out on it, but he also doesn't. He never tries to control her. It's always her choice. So then we have the divine feminine is the protector. It's standing up in the face of injustice. It's this, I will not allow oppression and abuse. It's a holy use of power and taking up space, speaking up, protecting against wrongdoing, ensuring equity, not only for others, but also for yourself. It's honoring and protecting your own desires, your rest, your goals. This is the group where examples are the most scarce. When coming up with women role models, we are much more comfortable holding up women who exemplify the divine masculine role and much more likely to judge women who honor their own needs. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say we see more of that divine feminine in Feyre when she does try to stand up at the tithe, and then it doesn't go well because Tamlin's a douche. And sorry, we shouldn't be painting him with a broad brush. Or we could, I mean, whatever. We can be compassionate towards towards Tamlin and say, come on, you don't need that much. Yeah. And then, yeah, certainly she, we see her taking that rest and prioritizing her needs when she does need the space, especially after she finds out about the mating bond. Yeah. But yeah, so saying that Dionysus is, feminine expressions of the divine masculine, and that really, as a general rule throughout a lot of the myths with Dionysus, he really is kind of genderless, or maybe not even genderless, but like embodying both. He also opens up a generous space for his powerful female consorts. He lets them express complexity and wildness. He gives them a freedom of expression that they are denied within the bounds of a repressive culture. His is a generous magic. Dionysus is also a god of revolution and independence. His arrivals signal the inversion of social norms and unfettered, uncivilized celebration conducted by the social underdogs, or the societal underdogs. Dionysus's wife is Ariadne, and his relationship to Ariadne is flipped. It's dynamic. It's outside of gender stereotypes. He immediately corrects the power dynamic by elevating his beloved to divine status. Like, there are these things, I'm literally just like, yep, Rhys does this, Rhys does this. And checks then the boxes. I know. I mean, I was just like, hello, I'm not wrong. I was like, he feels Dionysian. Why is that? And then I opened up this book and I'm like, fuck yeah, I fucking knew it. And then Sophie Strand in her book cites the work of Elaine Pagels in The Origin of Satan, saying that devil was originally termed as a stumbling block, a course correction. It's the wrong way forward. It's this invitation to stop and reassess, being able to step closer to your true desire and your purpose as a result. And that the devil was originally seen more as like a guardian angel. And I'm like, that is exactly the role that Rhysand is playing at the end of that book 1. Yeah. But still with a little bit of that like devil, like judgment that we would have, or like that's like that we would be thinking that he's bad, but he really is. In the second task, like Feyre can't read and she's about to pull the wrong one, but like through the bond, through that bargain that they made, like he stops, like he's a barrier to her pursuing this thing that she thinks is the right step, but he's like, no, like I'm going to help, like you need to pull a different lever. And and then like being that guardian angel, protecting her, sending her music. And that Dionysus was also kind of in the early depictions of the devil card in the tarot. He had bat wings. And I was just like, oh my God, Rhysand has wings. Like, and that's a recollection of pagan practices that venerated nature and animal gods. And so again, like, and maybe that's also, again, some of like that, the lore of the Fey world, where, yeah, I'm still a little bit weary of the use of the words male and female, because it just feels like it's biological determinism or something like that. But I can suspend my disbelief and say that it's in honor of like that it's maybe some sort of connection to our wildness or something like that. But yeah, I do still feel a little. Anyway, so Rhysand as this Dionysian reorienting power in the room. Yeah, I think the thing that I will just kind of end with then from the Natalie Wynn stuff is that romantasy is a way of she called it identity, and it's this idea that but it really does relate to power, that it's like women being able to control the male power. Merging with a man has historically been the way for women to be able to be on the path to power. But that additionally there's this, and again, if we look, I think it's maybe that same triangle from Anne Carson, but if we have that there's a female reader on one end of the triangle, there's a male hero, and then the female heroine on the other ends of the triangles, that we have like the female reader that both wants to replace the heroine, like wants to be the heroine, but the female reader also through the book can identify with that male hero that then desires the heroine. And that it's actually like this autoerotic, that we can identify with the masculine subject that's desiring the feminine object while also wanting to be that feminine object. And I think when I think about that, I think that it is just like a practice of secure attachment. Like as I'm reading Feyre, and I'm thinking like, okay, she as the protagonist, especially in the beginning of book 2, she's carrying a lot of guilt and shame over killing those two Fae. And of course, I would feel that guilt and shame if I had to do that.
Absolutely.
And also, as the reader, I can be like, girl, your options were so limited, and like, you knew, like, it's like, there was so much worse killing that happened. You know, like, it's like, I can almost kind of, like I can extend to her love and I can extend to her compassion through this book. And it's like, well, if I can do that for Feyre, then like, can I offer a little bit of that for myself in like in the world that I live in, that I grapple with. And again, like not to like negate that shame or that guilt is there. But that, yeah, I can, eventually I did. And maybe it was again, just on the audiobook, but like, the way that she just kind of is continually like cutting herself down. And I'm like, oh, come on. Like, we know how much everybody loves you because we get to see Feyre through the desire of these other people that she's around. And so I don't know. I that was just another compelling piece for me. But the thing that I'm just left with then is like, okay, if A Court of Thorns and Roses is subversive smut, like if I locate myself in these books, or if I locate the characters in these books in my world, like who is Rhysand and what is he doing? Like what's he up to in our world? And Burju, I know we talked about this just a couple days ago, because it does just seem like very odd timing that that the United Healthcare CEO's assassination happened just like a couple days ago. And the romantasy world of book talk is like all abuzz with this assassin. And there was a meme I read, or a tweet, it was like a retweet of something where it was just like the way that he did it and the crime scenes that were left behind were narratively breathtaking. You know, like you can't write it that good. And like there is a reason why like there is this like huge contingency of women, and I'm going to say like definitely inclusive of that romantasy genre, that are like 100% sympathetic to this guy. And I think it is like this like there's this vigilante, there is this like I'm going like this Robin Hood aspect, there's this I have this power and I can wield it in this way.
Struck me as interesting too, and it's funny because when having conversations about it, again, this goes back to my moral stance, right? Like I'm a nonviolent person, and then there's understanding that violence is in multiple forms. First of all, like what CEOs of healthcare and health insurance companies are violent through their policies, right? And how they're literally causing many people to lose their lives because they're denying coverage, life-saving coverage, right?
Right.
So, and then, you know, you think about situations, any situations, the oppressors don't, the oppressors are violent in every form, through policies, through actual force, and you know, everyone wants to say, oh, we should peacefully protest, but we all see what happens. And then, you know, to speak about fiction, like we're always on the side, like in the Hunger Games of the you know, we're on the side of the people violently fighting for their freedom,
right?
Violently fighting for their lives, because just holding a sign and being peaceful, if anything, the peaceful protesters still get the violence, as we've seen on our university campuses,
exactly,
right, with the protests. So it's just one of those things, right, when having a conversation with especially my children, you know, because, you know, it's always like, well, you know, violence should never be the answer. And in situations where there is no other way forward, what do you do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's different roles that people play. Like, maybe it's not me that will be the one going out and taking out insurance SEOs, but I'm also suddenly a little visually impaired when they're asking if I've seen the guy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You know, I'm also the one that's not going to call resistance terrorism.
Right.
I'm also the one, you know, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
So, but that's another grapple, right? Oh, I'm sorry. And it's another grapple, right? It's like, you know, it's like, you know, then someone comes to me and says, I thought you were not violent. And I was like, I am nonviolent. I don't seek out violence. I don't want to harm another human being. And when I see people being harmed, I feel like action needs to be taken to then save or free or stop that harm from occurring, right? And when peaceful protests are not happening, then you resort to other things, right? I mean, you know, my action is always going to be leaning more towards how do I affect policy? How do I boycott? How do I hurt them with financial, you know, weapons, if you will?
But there are still very real people that are very really dying from, like their insurance companies not, or like just like by the fucked up state of healthcare. It's just
interesting. It's just, and I think that goes to how much stories and fiction and fantasy are important to us, because all of a sudden, you know, there's one person that takes out one CEO, is like it's like we are romanticizing it. We're like, dude, what, you know what I mean? Like, it sends a message. It's not it's an act on its own that's not okay. Like, murdering someone is never okay, right? And you can't deny that has an impact in a certain way.
Well, right. And like,
you know,
if we actually like can widen our aperture to just be like, actually the CEOs of these corporations, like they are the king of Highburn, you know, like they are enacting these like, it's like they can say that like, oh, it's just our business plan. Like they can depersonalize it all they want, but it's like, no, you do have very real power to change things, to not be exploiting people. Like there are, like everybody has like just a little, I mean, not everybody, but like certainly every CEO has a little access to some power that they can toggle to just make the world a little bit of a better place, or do a little less harm, or, you know, something there. And it's like, I think if we had more CEOs scared of the possibility of retribution for their actions, then like we probably would have a much better world than we would ever get by peacefully protesting.
They're unchecked. They have unchecked power.
Exactly.
Right? So that's the issue, is when people go unchecked, like this is what happens. So
yeah,
you can beg and say, hey, Mr. CEO, please don't be so mean. Please let people live, right? And it's like, who's gonna stop me, right? Well, here's someone who did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
do you want to maybe rethink those policies, because we tried asking you nicely?
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's what I mean. Like you spoke about it. Like there's, Rhysand is also quite violent. Like he will rip anyone to shreds that harms anyone he cares about. Right.
Yep.
And that goes, I mean, wouldn't you as a mother, wouldn't you rip people to shreds that tried to harm your children?
Certainly. Yeah.
So like, again, the things we grapple with, right? Like, we all have maybe a hard line, and everyone says like, what's your hard line? Like, at what point do you stop being complicit? At what point do you just look away? At what point do you, do more than just talk?
Right.
At what point do you start acting? Right. Like, so those are just interesting things. So again, it's, I'm not going to walk around saying like, I don't believe in idolizing anyone or anything. I like the idea of having these conversations and really diving deeper.
Yeah.
And I think our imaginations are powerful, and that's what I'm starting to really realize, is that by reading these books, it's giving me the capacity and the space to imagine a better future.
Yes.
Because it again, if we're just talking about the disassociated millennial, just doing this all, whatever, like in New York City, I live that life. That's like, I've been there, done that. I want to imagine something different. Like I live under patriarchy right now. I live in capitalism right now. I want to be daring and brave enough to imagine something different. So if I'm doing it through these fantastical beasts and mystical figures, then so be it, right? Because maybe that is what it's going to take for us to have collective liberation,
totally.
Right? Through moving, dancing differently, through speaking differently, through acting differently. That's how we're going to find our way into a world. We've been stripped of this ability to be able to imagine something better for ourselves, where, it's impossible to exist without having impact on either the planet or people around us. Like, we're always going to have an impact. But like you said, minimizing bad, increasing the good, or just living in balance, the way the indigenous practices were, right? Like what I take from the land, I replenish. I am of the land myself.
Right.
You know what I mean? So one day I return back to it. I will become the fertilizer that in the soil that helps this tree. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, that's what I want to dare to go back to and continue to reimagine, because we're also in a different place. I mean, we have technology, we have AI. What does that look like? How do we ethically move forward from here? You know what I mean? How do we care about community and people from here? And we all have roles to play. There's going to be the violent vigilantes, and there's going to be the highly thoughtful and educated and articulate, speakers, and we're gonna have all, and they all have their role to play. But the goal is still collective liberation. It's that we can all live a life worth living, where we're free, where we love and honor one another, and all these things.
Right.
So, that story really hit me after spending a few days like not even really looking at anything because I was busy with life. I turn on and this is what I see, and it's like people are literally like, hello, Mr. Rhysand, or this is totally
on the book talk,
another book, right? The book talk, we're just like, this is our real life Xaden Rhysand from like Fourth Wing, which we'll have to talk about one day. And like, so it's dare we say fun to romanticize, like, because life is hard and it's depressing, and it's like I don't want to go into dark places where I can't crawl out of. So to romanticize it in a way that's like, not, how do I say this, like I don't want it, I don't idolize it. I wouldn't use it as an example, but it's like, hey, sometimes there's a gray area. Where
I mean, I can just I'm a very privileged person to be able to say that you know, I mean, that I come from a place of nonviolence. Like I've never I've never had to bury a loved one because we couldn't afford our insurance premiums or the out-of-pocket care that it would have cost. Like that would fucking radicalize me for fucking sure. And so it's like, I recognize my own like desire to like want to, you know, like where does my people pleasing history, like, cause I don't know, like I actually don't fucking know. I want to be anti-violence. But maybe I actually do really want a world where people are so terrified of being CEOs in these big corporations because it's a target on your back, so that these corporations have to change their policies. Yeah. You know, like I don't know, like that actually sounds a lot better than being when I was a former teacher and we had to do like, oh my God, the number of times we had to do intruder drills as a public school teacher, and then as you know, I had children of my own that were going into that world, and it's like, okay, so we're okay with, you know, our kids and our schools being like sites of these gun violence, and then like one CEO. I mean, it just, I don't know, like it was super targeted. And it's like that gunman didn't go in and just like completely open fire. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I am fucking grappling with it. And maybe it is because I'm a little bit desensitized to violence because of Rhysand. Maybe I just need a little bit more I don't know. I don't know if what the symbol that this violence can be, because the world that we live in is actually a violent one. We can just point to systems and say like, oh, that's just the way it is. It's just the laws. But it's like, but no, like there are people that can change that. Like, we could make different choices tomorrow, but we just have stockholders that want different, you know. It's like you and I can connect and be like, of course we want collective liberation. I don't know that like everybody necessarily agrees that that's the goal. And I don't know that we can get there non-violently. I think we would have gotten it by now.
Every war, every conflict has been fought. I mean, even in our society, we've been taught that, you know, why do we celebrate a Veterans Day? We celebrate our military for fighting violent wars to protect our quote unquote freedoms, right? So we're all acknowledging that violence was absolutely necessary in the name of protection. Yeah. It's quote unquote, right? Yeah. So, but that's what I'm saying. It's when you flip the coin, then it's not okay, right? When people do it across the ocean, when they want to protect their lands, their indigenous lands, it's terrorism. Right. It's so terrible. Right. But then you're also using violence and saying that that's okay. So we have to take them out because otherwise they take us out. Like, so who's right here? Who's wrong? Well, right. Here? I think, you know what I mean? Right. Is there even a right or wrong? Like I said, is there really a reality without the violence? Unfortunately, I mean, even in the books, if you go back to the books, like they're like, we're probably gonna have to fight another war before we can work towards peace. Right. Like they're acknowledging like the reality is we have to get to this point because the oppressor or the evil or the whatever, the predators don't understand peaceful. Let's come to a table and discuss and come up with. They don't understand that. So we will have to fight. We will have to defend. And should we come out of it alive, then those of us that are left can hopefully reimagine something different. But then who's to say that another century from now, the next predator or harmful person doesn't come, right? So is there ever really true peace? Or is it just cyclical, right? This is our war era. This is our peace era.
Yeah. Yeah. No, a lot to grapple with. For sure. And yeah, I think it just is interesting just noticing like to just be like, you brought up Hunger Games, and I just remember seeing somebody there was like some TikTok or whatever of a woman dressed up as Katniss Everdeen in like response to the election results, right? And it was like very clearly like, you know, she was upset that Trump won, understandably so, and somebody was critiquing this like kind of like her whole like, I'm gonna be Katniss Everdeen now, and maybe critique is a strong word, but they were just like locating, like, if you are a woman in the United States, you are actually not Katniss Everdeen. You're in District 1 or District 2. Like, Katniss Everdeen is in Palestine. Like, so unless you are actually in solidarity with Katniss Everdeen in Palestine, like, don't pretend like you are Katniss Everdeen. And I love that. I mean, there was a little part of me that was like, I get a little side eye anytime like men want to criticize women, just because like, oh, that sounds familiar. But like, but it was a worthy grappling invitation for me, where it's like, okay, I'm not Feyre. Like, I've never had to, like, I guess I could look back at to different parts of my life where there was like perceived scarcity, but in hindsight, like there actually wasn't. Or not as much as maybe I thought there was. So it's like a perceived sense of scarcity, but I never had to like, I never had to even like work to supplement my household income in anything, you know, like, so in any sort of stretch of the imagination of what's the metaphor of her going out and hunting in the woods. Like, I certainly, you know, like, I was always well fed. Like, so I just know, like, I'm not actually Feyre. At no point am I Feyre. I'm also not Rhysand. I have some access to privilege. Like, I have a decent amount of privilege, actually. So I'm probably somebody in the high, like, I'm probably in the fairy realm for sure. Maybe high fae. I don't know. Like, what does it look like to actually be a part of like the revolutionary court? And I don't actually know. I think Rhysand and his lands are like, I also have critiques about how Valaris could be cut off from the rest of the world. I just think that that's absolutely like fantasy to think that like you could just survive as like an island. It's like, no, we all need each other. Like that. I just believe in interdependence. So just the idea that you could be like totally cut off from the world, but I get it. He needed to like protect this land. But yeah, like, I also have questions on just that he has this, like, again, this coherence and this is how it has to be, but I don't get the sense, I think maybe it's actually the third book, where he really struggles with diplomacy. Like, he really struggles actually getting other people in other courts to be on his side. He has some work to do as far as like, how can we collectively co-create a better future? He is very much a vigilante for sure. Like, let's go in there, let's fight. He's an Illyrian warrior. That's his take. But it's like, he doesn't have like the visionary, like, what does it actually look like to, you know, show compassion or forgive, or like, there's elements of the divine masculine that are lacking. Like, Rhysand is not perfect. He's still wounded. He's still like, you know, don't say the word whore around him, because he's got, you know, like, that's a big activation trauma response from him, you know, like, and aren't we all flawed? Like, and can't that be okay? But they're just like, I see a lot of the US imperialist forces in like creating these really coherent narratives of like, okay, we're going to go in there and we're going to fight and we're going to do that. Like, and that's a lot of, you know, that disavowal that I was talking about, like, oh, it's just so nice to just like on this romantasy world of like, oh, and I'll just like Rhysand, there's just always food available, and there's always clothes in the armoire, and there's always a fire in the fireplace, and I never even have to chop wood. Like, it's just all these things are just done for you, and you don't even have to make decisions, because like you just know the best foot forward because he has it all laid out. And it's like, we also need to like question that just a wee bit. Like, whatever narrative, you know, the army wants to push as far as like, what does it mean to be safe? Like, let's question that. So like, again, I got notes. I think ACOTAR is a beautifully compelling romantic story. I loved reading it, and it's just interesting trying to overlay it with the world that we live in and be like, okay, it's easier for me to accept when it's, you know, Rhysand and these Illyrian warriors, but then when there's this vigilante doing this, you know, there's like this pull to be like, ooh, well, we should be nonviolent. But then I have a question of like a lot of the people that are like really offended by that level of violence, that are not offended by the violence of what it is to be in the healthcare complex in the United States, and that our tax dollars have been funding genocide in the Middle East now for, forever. And, like, that's come to a head, and people are like, oh, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's like, no, it's actually really not complicated. It is fucking genocide. And I'm really clear on that. And then but then it's like, oh, but like, it feels like it's complicated. And it's like, yeah, like, I don't want to celebrate that anybody's dead. Everybody deserves to be alive and well. I'm sorry. I really do feel for, like, the kids that lost a father and all the people. Like, I can do both. Like, I can be like, this was a man that shouldn't have been killed, and he was in a position of power that he could have refused. That I've refused. Nobody needs to be a CEO in order to put food on the table. Is where my head goes.
I don't believe there should be any billionaires at all. I think it's just complete opposite to be a billionaire and that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
I mean, it just doesn't. I think that's evil. You don't get to that position without exploiting people and planet.
Mm-hmm.
Having a brand, I feel like there's a lot of good we do. We provide an artistic space of inclusive space, right? Size inclusive, gender inclusive, race, you name it, everything inclusive, where people can be free to express themselves in a no judgment zone. And we clap back on anyone that talks smack about our people.
Right.
Because again, people should be held accountable for the things that they say and do that cause harm.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in unchecking them. So it's not just delete. I was like, you don't like what you say, you don't belong on this page. You will see me stick up for the people.
Right.
But again, those, I guess my grapple is, how do I exist as a business, which in general, business and capitalism, no matter how sustainable we try to be, how equitable we try to be, there's still its impacts, on the planet, right? Like, at the end of the day, I can't control how much something buys and whether they toss it in the landfill or they responsibly, like, sell it secondhand or donate,
Right.
Those are the things that you can ultimately not control. And so just things I always think about, and I just don't want to have a business that's that big. You know what I mean? I want everyone to have that, enough of the tool so they can have the freedom to express themselves and have a safe space where they are celebrated.
Yes.
And I want to do that. And I don't need it to be $1 billion business. I don't want to be known as a CEO, but I think there's an opportunity to potentially be part of a movement of brands or businesses that are better.
Yeah.
And if we all do it better, then we can provide the products and the services, do good with that,
right,
and still be mindful, right? Be as sustainable as we can be. You know what I mean? Speak up for things. I became very political on my page. I was just honest, just because as a consumer I refuse to spend my money on things that fund genocide,
right,
or you know what I mean, on policies that I don't approve. So I got to a point where I said, well, I'm still me, right? Whether I'm mom, wife, friend, and everyone in that world knows where I stand on things. But then as business owner, why can't I tell people where I stand on things as the owner of this business?
Yeah.
And give them the choice to spend their money with me or not. I don't need, if you don't like what I value, if they're not in alignment with your values, then don't spend your money with me.
Right.
Find someone else. It's about choice, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
I'm giving you that choice. No one's forcing you, but people still want to force me to, like, you shouldn't write this, you shouldn't say this stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you're saying are you for or against free speech? Don't you want to know? Isn't this good? I did you a favor. Now you know.
Yeah,
not
now
to
you
spend
know.
Now you know. Make with that information what you choose.
Yeah.
So, I think where we are in capitalism, again, we have this role to play. So as a brand and a business in capitalism, I'm like, well, how do I use what I have, my platform, my audience, my product, to do as much good as I can?
Yeah.
Where there's places like insurance companies and CEOs that are doing bad, right?
Right. You can't fix that problem.
I can't fix that problem, but in my own world where I need money to survive, where I have children that I have to feed,
right,
where I need a roof over our head.
And you want to support the arts.
And I want to support the arts. So in my way, this is how what I've created for myself in order to make a living that I'm not, ashamed of. And I'm just honest about it. Like there's things that are not perfect and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if the technologies or the resources exists for doing the things. I wish that everything I did was like circular, that I could just sell it, take it back, repair it, sell it, you know what I mean? So that nothing else is being extracted. Not there yet, not in a cost effective way.
Right.
So, and I don't want to charge 5 times what I'm charging because then it's not accessible to people that I want it to be accessible to.
Right.
So all of these things are like, it's like a game, where the rules are the rules and you got to just figure out how to get around the board as many times and do as much good as you can. And hopefully we survive together without harming each other. Right.
Right.
And dare to imagine something better for ourselves. Maybe we get to a point where we, just all have shelter and can grow our own food and we have education and health and things. So we don't need money.
Yeah. And a lot more community.
And then it's more about community. You rely on each other. I mean, I'm happy to go there. I would let go of that business in a heartbeat, to be honest with you. Now it would leave a void potentially in a creative artistic space. Potentially, yes. But can we imagine another way of doing that? I mean, people can still move without
without shoes.
Certain articles of clothing on, technically. I mean, it's fun. You say, like you said it before, like, do we dare to like wish and want for these things? Like, I like pretty things. I mean, that's why I got into a shoe business, right? I don't like my shoes. It's just, they're pretty. I like to make my feet look pretty. I like how tall I stand when I wear them. We feel these things. And do I need 7 pairs? No.
Right.
Maybe we all each have our one and we're done with it, right? And last forever or whatever.
Yeah.
It's regenerative somehow. Like plant in, it grows another one. I don't know. But dare to imagine something different than this constant, like, I make it, you buy it. I make it, I buy it. And endless consumption. And then just stay quiet about what's going on in the world. Like, I just can't operate like that. So it's definitely a pin for another day because I grapple every day. There are days where I'm like, I want out. There are days that I'm like, no, I'm doing important work. There are days that I'm just, I don't know. It's always, it's like the ocean, right? High tide, low tide of everything. And so I guess that is the human condition, right? Like you're always just kind of faced with these choices. Yep. And sometimes they test your morals. Like they're like, okay, you said this, but now what? Yeah. When it comes to, like, we just passed the busiest shopping season with Black Friday. Like you said, you don't believe in consumerism. Why are you participating in Black Friday? And there's a company, I forget which one. I don't know if it's an outdoor company. I don't know if it's Patagonia or something like that. They literally shut down on Black Friday intentionally. They're like, do not spend your money on this holiday. And I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. Yeah. But for a lot of businesses, unfortunately, because I do pay people equitably, because I do want to sustainably source my products and not charge too much. Right. It's still inaccessible for some. Right. So unless I do this one sale in the year to make it more accessible and get more volume, like, we can't balance out the rest of the year. It's like, again, it's like this capitalist system is unfortunately also, it's part of our life source, right? So, and I'm not gonna quit. Like, I'm gonna continue my goal would be to not participate one day. Like,
wouldn't that be nice?
It would be lovely, right? I'd love to just say, no, we're not doing capitalism today. Yeah. We're done. And and I think there's a future for that. I don't know that I know the answer right now. Yeah. But I know that being conscious of it and being willing to talk about it and be honest about it and just put it out there and say, hey, I do it. This is my intention behind it, but I'm hoping to get more towards this. That I know that eventually, between letting my imagination and then these conversations take like get in their own life force, like, you know, and just kind of take a life of their own.
Yeah.
And something's got to be better in the future.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like reading Feyre, and I'm like, wow, like I'm reading Feyre, and like she shouldn't be raking herself over the coals for this. It's like I hear you talk about yourself in this way, and like your desire and the grappling and the grief, and it's just like, but like I see you so clearly for I hear you say all that, and I'm just like, man, if only every single CEO or person in that position of power within any sort of, whether it's a shoe company or a fucking insurance industry, and is like, I am not the head. I'm working with anybody that I'm in the room with. And I am having the interests of everybody that's impacted by this. Like, who are the people that can't access this, and how can I increase their access? Like, how can I be here in a good way on this land and resource these things sustainably, and how, and like what's the end life of this product, and okay, well, can we do secondhand, you know, like it's just like you've thought so clearly on, like you've checked so many boxes. And yes, it's not enough, because in late stage capitalism, like there is no pathway to perfection, there is no purity. If you weren't doing this, like there, like it's like there's just so few people that we can just totally like point to and be like, well, that's blameless, because that person probably still has a cell phone that it has lithium that's from some land, you know what I mean? Like it's like it's like we just need to like put down the tools that there's like perfection as possible, and just be like, man, like, but I'm going to offer up my grappling on the altar of like what the future can hold, and I'm going to allow myself to be radicalized by art, and to lean into community, and to have my, you know, my creative practices, my wildness practices, I'm going to resource myself for collective liberation, and not forgetting my own in there. And I like, yeah, I get like, and I also just think like that's fucking Rhysand too. Like he grapples with it too. Like he has, like, he never feels like he's enough. He has this like not enough wound. Maybe it's a little bit of, I don't know, maybe he's got a little bit of degraded feminine in it, like never enough, something like that. But like, but I also just think that that's just like the grief and despair of what it is to be alive in this moment in time. You know, when we have just as a species traded so much of our wildness for convenience or for comfort. I know I think about that an awful lot too. Anyway, I feel like I'm in good company anyway. Was there anything we wanted to say about how like Tamlin is like that stepping stone to the next thing? Like I know we talked a little bit earlier about how, like, you know, I was a science teacher for 10 years and I like thought I really loved it, and there's a lot about it that I did love, but then I like got to a point where it was like, oh, I got to get off this boat. Like I don't actually, like, this isn't taking me where I need to go right now. Maybe I can come back to it in some way, but today's not that day. And then you're taking that next step, and there's like, for me, there was this like really juicy, like the call to do a fucking podcast that's somehow related to like stories and witchiness and a cannabis practice. Like, what the fuck is that? I don't even know. But like, that was like the Rhysand that was like whispering through some bond that I couldn't quite like put my finger on. And like, I don't know, there was something juicy about just like thinking about these and like kind of like removing these people as people, like that. What if Tamlin was a profession, and what if Rhysand is your connection to your creative practice? Or maybe they are a person and they're the same fucking person that we've been, you know, in a relationship with for a dozen years or more. You know, like I had Kevin on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and it literally was like, there are aspects, I can say this in this conversation, it's like there are elements of our relationship that are Tamlin, and I don't want that anymore, but I see enough of Rhysand here that like, how can we embody more of like the revolutionary, the Dionysian of what it is that I want, and how can I let go of like my own role of the degraded feminine or whatever in that Tamlin. I don't know. I guess I was just curious. I know that was a conversation we had when we were sending voice memos back and forth. And that was the one bit as I was like, are we going to end this conversation? And I just wanted to bring it back to that. If there was anything more you wanted to share about that here.
What I got from the whole thing is, and I think this is how it resonated for me. I think Tamlin was absolutely a stepping stone. I think Feyre needed to feel safe first before she could imagine who she really was. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like she was in such a despair. Like, they were just hungry. Like, all she wanted, like you said, was time to paint and just food. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I think that's for all of us is very relevant. When our basic needs are met, right? Safety, food, shelter. Tamlin was necessary for her to get that basic, like, I just need to be able to eat, and my family need to be to eat, and I need to not be in survival mode. I just want to be able to paint a little bit, that like safety. That, and initially it wasn't so much about creativity. Initially it was more just about being safe enough to be creative. So it was about the safety. He provided, it's about the safety. Like, he will keep me safe from all these outside crap, right? These monsters and beings that I don't know anything about. So I say that all the time. Like, why do you have common petty theft going on a lot around this area, for example? Like, it's not because it's like a fun pastime. I don't generally don't believe that. I don't believe it.
Right.
People are doing it out of necessity, right?
100%.
Like, all of that stuff happens out of necessity. So I think Tamlin was who she needed in that point in her life. Now, once she had that, and she was able to be creative and express herself, and then, you know, kind of have the time to say, who is this human? Who am I? What power do I have? What do I really want now that I don't have to worry about feeding myself and whether I'm going to be alive tomorrow? And then Tamlin is no longer enough. Right? It's kind of like Ariana's Grande, thank you next. Like, one taught me patience, one taught me love. Like, and it's also like, I feel like different relationships. Like, I tend to be a person that can mourn relationships a lot. And I always feel like, well, what did I do wrong for this person to no longer be my friend? Or why did we break up? Or all these different things. But then I'm starting to learn that was, what is it? They come into your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime, right? Like, certain people, like that was her season or reason with Tamlin, and that season ended. The reason was no longer valid. Now she found her lifetime, like it was, but she still kind of had to have Tamlin to get to Rhysand. You know what I'm saying? So you cannot say, oh, I wish I could have skipped that part. It's like, it's also like, I wish I could have skipped book 1 to just read book 2.
Well, like, she she actually had to love Tamlin in order to break the curse to free Rhysand, right? And oh my God, that was another thing I was just going to say in this, like, just the way that she actually does have to save Rhysand several times kind of flips that the default hetero sadomasochism that Natalie Wynn talks about, and like the power that it's like, he's not like, he's very rarely saving her, and she's like a decent amount of times saving him. I mean, she saved the entire fairy realms in the first book, and then in the second book she has to like, you know, like take him and heal him after he's been shot down by the ash arrows. Like, there definitely are moments where she has to save him too, and I just think like she had to love Tamlin in order to break the curse. And what Rhysand needed from his mate was someone to break the curse. And so it's like, his mate actually did need to love Tamlin. You know, that like, even the whole time, like, it was like part of that trajectory. And like, so yeah, to your point, it's like, to look back and be like, why did I have to do that? It's like, well, because that was the way it had to be. Because that was the way it had to be. Sorry, I think I interrupted you though.
No, I mean, we got the point across for sure. I think it's also juicy. I mean,
yeah. And I think you were saying something too about creativity. And I think like when I say like creativity as a basic need, I there are definitely like times in my life when I would have like not identified as a creative person. Or I remember being asked like, what do you like to create? Or if you were a creative person, and I'd be like, oh, lesson plans, you know, like when my kids were young and I was a teacher, like it was just like, I felt so separate. But now it's just like, I mean, I can just like go for a walk, and if I can like engage with the world in a creative way. I can just think like, okay, I can think like an animist and be like, if this tree is just as enchanted by my presence as I am by it, like that's free, and that's enlivenment, and that's secure attachment with the more than human realm. I can be creative in how I make my meals, or how, you know, maybe like the prayer that I cast as I'm making the meal or as I'm consuming it, that like there's like a way that we can be in the world that has nothing to do with like things that we would have to buy, like paints or musical instruments or things like that. It certainly is those things too, but like I guess maybe when I say creativity, it's almost just like a spiritual connectivity, that it's just like yeah, like to just have your basic needs met and not kind of have any sort of like larger container of creativity, spirituality, awe, something. Yeah, that was, yeah, I guess what I'm thinking of is, you know, like Feyre had meals in the jail, but like she had her basic needs were met, but like she almost broke, and it wasn't until like Rhys sent her music that then like she was like able to be like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, I guess creativity can even just be in that I am going to intentionally enjoy art because art is resourcing me for collective liberation, or it's connecting me to my wildness, or it's guiding the pathway of my liberation. Like it maybe all of those things at the same time. Like, and like that's like what's it all for? So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to re-listen and edit all this, and any final?
No, thank you for having me. This is fun.
I'm so happy to have you. I'm so glad we have this. This will be fun. This will be fun to just have. All right, here we go. And I want to thank Matt Shuby for the podcast art, my husband Kevin Carlo for all his help in the creation of the theme song for the podcast, and Aeneas Mitchell and John Williams for their inspiration of Hedwig's theme and Hadestown. And before I sign off, I would like to leave you with a quote from another one of my teachers, Rev. Angel Kyoto Williams, who says, "Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters."